Good afternoon. In the interest of trying to stay on schedule, I thought I'd just get started knowing that maybe some more people will come in, and that's quite all right. And depending on what I say, some people may decide to leave too, and I suppose that's quite all right too. So first of all, I'm Hank Foley. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've been here since August now, and thoroughly am enjoying the experience here at Missouri. It's been terrific. For those of you who don't know my background, originally trained in physical chemistry. I've spent my career in chemical engineering. I've been at the University of Delaware. Well, actually, I should be truthful. For 4 years, I worked in corporate America as a chemist and found out that that was very much the real world and very unappealing to me after 4 years. And so I got back to academia as quickly as I could in 1986 as a 30-year-old assistant professor, which in those days was kind of old to be an assistant professor, particularly in chemical engineering. But I survived all that at Delaware, top department, got through the ranks, and then started doing administrative work, more dark side stuff, in around 1991, as soon as the day after I was promoted to associate. And then I went to Penn State. Penn State, I was a department head, chaired professor, and then various other positions, and ended up as vice president for research and dean of the graduate school. Most recently, as you know, I now have a new role on campus here at MU, which sounds a lot like vice president of research and dean of the graduate school. So, you know, I guess there are some people who just kind of fall back into something that academia likes them to do, and that's me, and it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, because MU and Penn State are so similar, it's incredible. I mean, right down to individual personalities and folks. It's just astonishing. Someday I'll write a book about it. It'll be like Moo or something like that, and we can all have a good laugh about it. Yeah. So what I want to do today is just share some thoughts with you, really at sort of the 50,000-foot level, which are kind of strategic. And they aren't meant to eliminate anything. They aren't meant to say we're not doing anything else. But a way for me to sort of help to integrate that which I think we are doing in a way that I hope will help us when it comes to applying for even more research funding from our friends in Washington, D.C. at the major agencies. So please keep that in mind. It's really a research strategy that's predicated on what I think is happening and has been happening over the last 10 or so years in the D.C. Agencies. And I think that we can take advantage of that at this time to really benefit ourselves if enough of us want to come together around some of these themes. So I've been talking about this wherever people will listen. My first talk on this was, I don't know, about 3 days after I got here to the Missouri 100, which is an investment group. They liked it. And it started to roll from there. I've talked in Kansas City about this. I've talked to the Ready group here. I've talked to the board about it. Just about anybody, you know, the grade schools locally, I'd be happy to talk to them if you could get me in. Just about anyone who will listen, because I think it's pretty important for us. And I think everyone could fit under this tent as we go forward. And yet at the same time, I think if we could raise our research expenditures and do more things, apply our papers to even better journals, raise our citations, produce more PhD students, those are sort of the primary measures that the Association of American Universities is using to sort of determine whether we should be retained as a member or not. And that's of real grave concern to us because obviously that's a very high prestige factor, right? There are only, what, 61 or 2 schools in the whole of the AAU. Our legacy is a tremendous one. I think we've been in for over 105 years. That's something we can't take lightly. And I know everyone that I've met so far has said to me from the day I was here, we have to focus on the AAU. We have to focus on maintaining that. Now, that doesn't mean it's the only thing. It's a problem. So from an engineering perspective, it's a problem that I could put a box around, and I could determine what we need to do to fix that problem. But that's it. It's not everything that we do. And so I want to be clear on that. Even though I think it's pretty clear what the prescription is to fix that, at the same time, I want to be sure that you don't think it's everything. So let's go ahead and run through some of this. And one of the key questions that I was asked to ask is really, how are you going to tie together academic affairs, research, and economic development? Soon after I got here, which was really interesting because the ad said Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs. And then I got here, you know, and they said, but it's also research and economic development. And I thought a lot about it, and I think we can. I think the three come together in and around entrepreneurship, and I'll try to explain that to you today as we go forward. And really what motivated me was sitting back and really thinking as deeply as I can anyway about the current state of affairs in the US, our economy. Our economy right now, Ron, I read in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, has been growing for the longest period since World War II, may set a record for growth. Unfortunately, it's pretty slow growth and nobody feels like it's growing, right? Would you agree with that? That's what I read. So what we have to ask ourselves, I think, especially people our age, my age, because we're going to leave this economy to a lot of people who are younger and who are going to be, here trying to make it, is who's going to create the wealth to drive the economic growth that will pay for the public sector jobs, government programs, and all those other things that we need to meet the expectations of a yet growing population and a population that has growing and heightened expectations. So I drove to college in a 1956 Volkswagen without a radio or a gas gauge, all right? And I thought I was doing pretty well, 36 horsepower, the whole bit. And I think you'd have a hard time finding anybody in this generation who would admit that, let alone do it, right? Because expectations are just that much higher. It's been a long time since we've seen a car without power windows, power door locks, power seats. We just take all that stuff for granted. But it's not that long ago that I remember growing up in a house without any air conditioning, that sort of thing. So expectations have gone up. And those expectations demand that we get expansion of the economy. And yet our economy is not expanding. And I say this with one of the most preeminent economic scholars sitting right here in front of me at MU, and so please go easy on me, because it's not my field, but I'm just speaking as layman. So the question becomes, how do we meet this? And the answer has been traditionally in the United States through innovation. We've been really good at innovation, and particularly since World War II, we were very good at innovation, and obviously had a major advantage over Europeans and the Japanese after the disruption of the war, but we were really very, very good at it, and we've done it well. Where are the innovators and the entrepreneurs today? Where are they going to come from? I want to talk about that and what I think the federal government expects of us. And what's our role going to be, especially here at MU, across the system, and really across the nation in academia, and how can we help? So that's really sort of the basis of what I want to talk about and how I think these pieces come together. You hear a lot about this these days. You hear about the innovation gap, the innovation deficit. You get complicated diagrams like this one from Christensen in The Innovator's Dilemma. And, we could try to take this apart, and it'd probably take 10 minutes to really explain it. But the idea is that we just aren't innovating the way we used to, right? And at the national level, you hear President Obama, we hear people in the agencies, we hear people on President's Council for Advancement of Science, PCAST, and so forth, talking about the fact that we are just not innovating, falling behind in patents compared to other countries and so forth. And then books like these come out talking about the innovation gap and so forth. And then we also hear about the innovation deficit, which is more or less the same thing, but is a little more precise in the sense that this is time and this is millions of dollars being spent on federal R&D. So this comes from the AAU and APLU, which are two of the organizations that, as I said, we're very proud to be a part of. And you can look at federal R&D expenditures tracking this way, and then the question became, somewhere around here, which way are we going to go? If we were to stay on pace with our previous path, I think, let's see, the previous path was here. To keep pace with China, we would have to go on this way, right? To hold R&D and GDP constant, we would have had to go this way. To hold R&D spending constant at 2011 levels here, and what we really did was that, with sequestration. So again, the question becomes, well, what are we doing? What's our national policy? And is anybody here from the Truman School? Nobody? Ha! Make a note. There is no policy that's really structured to help us through this. So the times are changing, and I'm going to shorten up what I usually talk about quite a bit so that we have time to discuss this. And, talk about change. This is Bob Dylan more or less today. And usually I show a picture of Bob Dylan when he was young before Reuben Carter and all those things, and, you know, talking about the times are changing, where I borrowed this, and, you know, times really have changed. That's all I'll say. This is John Holdren, who's not exactly a fresh face either, but a brilliant man. And, you know, John Holdren is a physicist. He's Harvard, Yale, places like that. Absolutely as academic as you could possibly be. The highest of academic sort of standards and values, I would think. And yet, here's what happens to him in Washington. He says, it's essential to document with solid evidence the returns our nation is obtaining from its investment in research and development. And then he goes on to talk about STAR metrics, which he drove as an important element of doing just that. You know, that's kind of a surprising statement from an academic's academic. It's the first time in my career that I've heard them start to really talk about in Washington at the highest levels true ROI. And those are usually the gadflies who talked about that sort of thing. And the people who were there advising the president were usually the people who said, no, it's the endless frontier. Vannevar Bush had it right. We're just going to keep going into the future. Have faith. And I think there's a little bit of loss of faith for two reasons. One is, on one side of the aisle, they do tend to criticize academia. I think you know that. I think that's fair to say. And on the other side of the aisle, I think they feel they have to, is that me or you? Somebody calling me? Don't do that. That's not, it's not me. Okay. And on the other side of the aisle, I think they feel they have to defend us, but there's a certain part of them that says, okay, but we can only defend so much, and then we have to really show that we're taking the academics to task. And I think that's what this is about, and I think it's very serious. I think they really mean it. We certainly saw this coming out of the AARA, right? When we saw that program and the kinds of metrics that were put in place, even when the money went away, the metrics are still there now. And I think they'll continue to be there. Those metrics are things like federal research dollars expended at your institution divided by number of licenses, federal research dollars expended divided by number of new companies, federal research dollars expended divided by patents, you name it. Anything along those lines that they feel is sort of a pseudo-financial measure of effectiveness of use of the funds in lifting the economy, they throw in here. And if you look at STAR metrics, it's more complicated than that, obviously. But that's really the crux of it. And it's the first time in my career, after what, almost 35 years, that I've heard that specifically. Now, the good news of this is that opens a little bit of an opportunity for schools that figure this out to get in and to do it better than other schools and to create some advantage from that. And that's really where I want to go today. What they're really saying here is that universities are going to be the new engines of innovation, right? And innovations, inventions, and so forth. Take a deep breath when you think about that for a minute. Innovation and university are two words that typically do not go together. We're not known as an innovative sort of sector of the economy. Very solid, very successful, best in the world. Innovation is not the word that usually comes to one's mind in thinking about academia. Invention, creation of new knowledge, absolutely. But innovation and invention are different. Invention, think of Thomas Edison, right? The classic canonical sort of inventor. Think of innovation as Henry Ford, who literally said, I never invented anything. All I did was kludge good ideas that other people had together in a new way. So there's a little bit of difference there. And it's interesting then to ask, can universities really be the engines of innovation, given that sort of set of constraints? And I think the answer is yes, but we can't do it alone. So let's use the metaphor of an engine, right, with all of its cylinders grinding away, you know, pumping in, let's say, air up here and fuel down here, and economic power coming out of here. And this is sort of the metaphorical picture, I think, that folks in DC have in their mind. But the reality is something a little different. Before we get there, you know, one of the ways they measure the size and the volume, the displacement of that engine is to look at your federal expenditures, right? So now we're back to thinking about AAU and the others. And our federal expenditures here are, I think, about half of this number. Chris, is that right? It's about 130 or so million dollars in federal expenditures. The rest of this is sort of our own matching of those dollars. And then on top of that, we've got our sister campuses at UMSL, UMKC, and S&T. Where that puts us right now is about 88th in the nation in terms of NSF research expenditure reporting. I'd like to be higher than that, and I think you would too. Over the last few years, we've dropped from about 77th to 88th. And I think this year we're going to go a little lower, and I'd like that to be a bottom. I'd like that to be the floor. I'd like to start to move us back up again. And that's part of what this is about. Again, why do I care? Because first, I think it's important for the state of Missouri. It's important for the university as a land-grant university. It's important to be a place that's driving and creating new knowledge. That's baked into our DNA as part of what we are as a land-grant university. Got a whole nother talk I've given the Board of Curators on that, just to be sure that we're level set with them on that. So it's crucial to us. It distinguishes us from the other public universities in the state, of which there are 9 other public universities, and we want to have that distinguishing feature. We want to be, especially here at MU, the flagship university for the state of Missouri. So we've got to work on this a bit, because on the other hand, the other side of this is, that's the first thing that the bean counters at the AAU look at, right? So they look at those federal expenditures, and then they continue to trundle down the other primary measures and the secondary measures, and they look at the gross, and then they look at the ratio per capita faculty member on the tenure and tenure track. So that's where that is right now. It's healthy, but we want to make it better. Now, if we want to get this really working the way we think that they want it to work in Washington, or the way they sort of imagine it, it really looks more like this, where here's the university as an engine, and here are the wheels that need power that turn, if you will, and do something, do work in the real economy. And what you need to connect those two is some sort of a transmission, all right? So again, very metaphorical, but you get the idea. An engine on a test stand can run all day, can run for hours, years, whatever. Doesn't do anything. But when you connect it to a transmission and a drivetrain, now you've got an automobile, you could do something with it. You've got a truck, you could do something with it. Now here's the key, and this is the solution that I don't think everyone else gets yet. We don't have to do all of this internally. What we have to do is figure out how to do these pieces really well, and then be really friendly with the community and connect to them as our transmission. That's why I talk to groups like the Centennial Investors. Anyone here a Centennial Investor, a member of that group? Somebody might be. Excellent group of people here in Columbia, ready. I'll talk more about this. A plethora of public and private organizations, individuals. They're the community that I'm referring to here that know how to take things to the market. We don't need to learn all of that. And I think this is a mistake some schools are going to make. Some schools think they know how to do that, they don't. Some schools think they got to import people to do that, they don't. What we really have to do is be shrewd and really friendly and work with those people who are dying to help us, including a lot of really well-to-do alums who are very good at this, many of whom I've met already, and more of whom I hope to meet going into the future. So kind of keep that picture in mind. And so it's community tied to university, tied to innovation. Let's call it Farfignugan. Communivation, if you will, right? Just a simple name to keep it in mind. And where does this take place? Well, here's the university. What do we bring? Our piece is research, technical expertise, entrepreneurial ideas, some new entrepreneurs, and we'll talk more about that. The community brings capital, services, management, mentors, seasoned entrepreneurs, and the like. And the key is this piece, right? The better we do this connection, the more we'll have this connection, which is the federal and state support. Now, I don't want to talk about state support today. That's a whole nother issue in Bill, what is it, 506 and that sort of thing. We got to work our way through that with the state of Missouri, I think. It's going to take some time. But I believe that this approach will even help us there, although that there may be some people who we just can never convince. But I think over time, and not too much time, we've got to start to convince more people that they need to really support their flagship university at a higher level, right? It's a statement about the state, but even more than that, there's probably no better investment that they can make than an investment in the University of Missouri. Communivation, I think, is also important to keep in mind that it scales, and it has to scale. We have to start in our own backyard. For MU, that literally means right here in Columbia, but also extends to St. Louis and Kansas City, where we have 2 other campuses that we could work with. And the idea is that if you could get it right locally, then the state starts to participate more. We need the state to help us with startup packages and things of that sort. It's never happened here before, all right? I'm used to a place where the state didn't like us and gave us an appropriation and $40 million a year just to keep the place running and for upkeep and maintenance and things like that. And we told them it wasn't enough money. Can you imagine? Anyway, and we got away with it. We had them convinced at one point they needed to double it, and then a Republican administration came in and we thought they'd take it to 0. They kept it at 40 million, right? So these things can be done. Similar situation, big eastern city, big western city, rural domination of the legislature. We could do it, but we have to really, really think about how we approach these people. Once we get it right at the state, we can get recognition and do it at the regional level, nationally, and then you're really in a place where you could start to have global impact. So the strategy for research starts with a vision. And for me, the vision would be, and I hope you could share this, is that by 2025, which sounds awfully close to me in time, and this is a stretch goal, but the University of Missouri system and what I call the Missouri Research Quadrangle, made up of our 4 universities, can become an international hotbed of innovation driven by high technology startup companies. I'm not talking about taking Silicon Valley from California and bringing it here. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about the things that we are really good at and that we should be the Silicon Valley of, if you will. We should be the Silicon Valley of everything that has to do with ag biotech. There's just no doubt about it. I think in nuclear medicine and technologies around imaging and therapeutics, there's no doubt about it. We should be absolutely the best in the country at that. Information technology, maybe, maybe not, maybe embedded in the other areas that we're looking at. Additive manufacturing, we certainly got to look at that with companies like Boeing in our region, huge company, which we spent a lot of time with, thanks to Jim Thompson and Noah Manring, who I hope is here somewhere. A lot of discussions, advanced materials, tying together strengths here at MU with strengths at S&T. They're really good at materials. They even do metallurgy still at S&T. I can't tell you how astonishing that is, right? Most schools gave up metallurgy decades ago. The ones who kept it, by the way, and there are only a few, are actually very precious now because they did that. So these things would be born from the University of Missouri via regional push for innovation and tech-based economic development. And I think I've worn out the laser printer already, the laser pointer already, but that's, oh, nothing's working. Okay, so let me go over here and continue this way. Strategy for research. So the strategy statement, which is still in draft form, is something like this. MU and the University of Missouri system will be the, quote, best in class, something that Tim Wolf likes to hear us use as a term, be the best in class at the translation or the transfer of research to products and services that better human health and well-being. Right? That's what I think is the core of that which we could do here uniquely and better than other schools around the country. We could be the best in a class of top Midwestern public research universities across the Big 10, the Big 12, and the SEC. I have no doubt about this. To do it, though, we have to really pull together, and we have to all buy into it. At least enough of us have to buy into it to make it happen. The strategy. Now, when we do our strategic plans, we have strategy, then we have themes, levers, actions. At the themes level, I think these are the key. Number one, work together for synergy across Missouri, particularly across the 4 campuses. I know we haven't done a lot of this in the past. It happens at the faculty member level, but I would like to think that MU is big enough and strong enough to really help pull those other campuses along, and to the extent that they can, help us to do that which we think we could do better than anyone else. Again, it doesn't mean everybody at UMSL has to be involved, but when there are really good people at UMSL who can be involved and can help in this mission, we should involve them. I really believe that. The second thing, and by the way, also at S&T and UMKC, just so I'm not misunderstood. Second, grow our own entrepreneurs and innovators. We're going to talk more about this, but the idea is that we've got how many kids a year that we graduate, right? And how many kids do we need to create an entrepreneurial community around each of our 4 campuses? Not that many, so we'll talk about that as well. Third is be shrewd and smart with intellectual property. This is a little twist. You know, for 30 years at major universities like this one, we have done the same thing over and over again with okay but not great results. And what I mean by that is we have to own all the IP. We're really rigid on that. We tend not to look away from that. We tend to think we're going to find a golden nugget in there somewhere, and we're going to become wealthy, fabulously wealthy as a university. As a result, it drives some wrong way behavior, I think, within the university. Some real wrong way behaviors. I want to try to fix that, if we can. The fourth thing is re-engineering the culture to unleash the power of the willing. I am willing to bet, and I am betting, that there's tremendous pent-up demand among a cadre of you who really would like to do more entrepreneurship, but haven't felt the support for it, haven't been sure whether it's considered a good thing, aren't sure how to get started. I'd like to solve that problem. We'll go back, no problem. And the fifth thing, is don't be jealous, which means that if we see something really good in another school and you think it's great and I should know about it, you should tell me. And if you're right and everybody agrees, we're going to steal it, as long as we won't get in trouble. But basically, we're not going to be jealous, right? We don't have to invent everything here at MU. That's crucial. Most universities feel like we've got to invent everything ourselves, and it makes it a struggle. It makes the barrier that you have to get over even higher. Let's bring those barriers down, and what you find is there's tremendous goodwill out there among academies. They like nothing better than to be imitated, right? So let's imitate them when it makes sense and give them their perks. So here's theme 1, which is, why not call this the Missouri Research Quadrangle? I mean, we've got the North Carolina has their research triangle. We'll do them one better. And it's even bigger, right? Bigger is better. This is the United States. UM system statewide reach. We've got all of this bubble chart you can find on the web. I'm not going to go through all the pieces, but it brings everything together. Our campuses, it brings together all of our extension units. It brings together MoreNet. It brings everything together, which says that what we do in one place doesn't have to happen just in these large urban areas, but to the extent that we're able to determine what would be helpful in those communities, and I think our extension people are really good at this, we can drive things out to the rural sectors of Missouri as well, which, by the way, I think is going to be crucial if we're going to make the case for further funding and more effectiveness. You can't ignore that. We have to be there, engage, and treat people respectfully. The second theme is growing our own innovators and researchers and entrepreneurs. Again, to the extent that we can occasionally bring someone here from the West Coast or the East Coast, that's great. But by and large, at places like this in State College, Pennsylvania, which is in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. So what you have to do is come up with another strategy. And I think one strategy we could deploy is, in fact, to find those few young people among our undergraduates who are graduating, among our graduate students and postdocs, who would like to stay here, right, contiguous to us, and would like, with our support, to try to become entrepreneurs. I think what's going on in the MIC right now is fabulous. Jake and the other people who work down there, Jake Halliday, have done a marvelous job. One of our biggest challenges right now that most of you are unaware of is trying to find a new Jake, right, because he's going into retirement, and he's going to become a sculptor and weld big pieces of iron together and express himself, which I think is really cool. But the key is, we've got a lot of things that we could do to try to enhance this. One of the things that I'd like to do is to support our undergraduate minors in entrepreneurship, and I'm in the process of trying to find a way to actually bear the cost of those minors for 12 kids a year around the system symbolically to enhance their ability to become entrepreneurs. We'll have more to say about that as we go forward into the spring before the summer. but I think we could do that, and eventually I'd like to think that maybe a donor or maybe the state and a donor would come together and help us do even more of that. So aligning the elements and growing our own entrepreneurial base is not unrealistic. We could definitely do that. The state of entrepreneurship in Missouri is not bad. We're not at the top, Massachusetts is. We're not at the bottom, Louisiana is. We're frankly right about in the middle, like a lot of things. We're right about in the middle. And I think that's probably an area average over a lot of rural districts where there isn't a lot of entrepreneurial activity. I've been very impressed by what I see here in Columbia, what I've seen in St. Louis with Cortex, what I see out in Kansas City. It's really very impressive. So I think we've got the pieces. The Kaufman Index, same sort of thing. Their index runs from, I think, about 0.15 as a low. Louisiana does a little better on their index, up to about 0.5 as a high, and we're at 0.35. Different measures, different organization. The previous one was University of Nebraska at Lincoln, where they do this every year. This is Kaufman in Kansas City. So again, I would say that if you put a seed of entrepreneurship on the ground in Missouri, in the right place, water it, take care of it, it's going to grow. Other things, it's going to require an ecosystem. Policy is important. Gee, you know, we've got really good people in policy, capital, culture, support, talent, markets. All of these things come together in this tremendous, I think, opportunity here around the region to bring those pieces together. And if there's anything we need to do as a university is kind of get in the middle of that and sort of align it, bring it together, because it's all going and it's really good. But we have to find a way to get the university more involved with it and maybe even at the center of it. So things like Hash Boom, the READY program that happened this year, MoBio, these are excellent programs. Hawthorne Foundation, bringing people together around these themes. Missouri Technology Corporation. You know, there's a lot of public and private partnering going on to try to make this happen. We can take advantage of that and help to make it better. All right, third thing is being smart with IP. And the first thing we got to do is what they're doing up here, which is loosen things up a little bit. Again, if we have an industry sponsor like a Boeing, and we're trying to really develop an end-to-end relationship with Boeing so that we have got a strong pipeline for our students who are graduating to go to Boeing, so that at the other end of the relationship, they're considering us for development gifts, for endowments, and so forth. And in the middle, you all are benefiting who do that kind of research, whether it's heat transfer or materials, from the interactions that you can have with them. Well, you know, we're not going to get very far if we insist that we have to own everything. Furthermore, it's not great to own 100% of nothing. And we often end up with 100% of nothing. As a young faculty member, I often found that kind of frustrating. Someone at DuPont Company wanted to support me because they liked my research, wanted to give us some money. Their lawyers got involved, said, no, it can't be a grant, it's got to be a contract. And our lawyers got involved, said, oh, but what about the IP? And the next thing you know, everybody's arguing with everyone. And you and the student are standing there going, I don't believe this. All I really want is the funding to educate that student. That's one case. There are other cases like that. Other things we need to do. We have to make decisions in my office much faster than we've ever had to before about IP. We don't have enough money as a public university to actually go out and patent everything. So what I need to tell you is that our shops are run like a business, right? Budgeted like a business, but are expected to function sort of like a service. But we don't get any GO money, right? So we only, as I said at the Board of Curators meeting, I raised a few eyebrows without intending to, we only eat that which we kill, all right? And that's really the truth. So we're going to have to get a lot better at deciding what are the key areas that we're going to carry, leaving the door open for that one-off that looks fantastic. What are the areas that we aren't likely to go forward in? And get that IP decision made quickly at the invention disclosure stage. And if we aren't going forward, we can't just kill it. We got to give it back to the faculty member, wave it back to them quickly, and then put in a provisional patent application for them. Sorry, too much detail for some of you, but you get the idea. And let them have that year to go out and try to market it. And oh, by the way, if they find someone who wants it and they still want our help, go back and think about it. So that's also very important to us. And I think all of this lends itself to making I don't know, a better atmosphere, a better environment for everyone. Young people who are in the sciences and engineering who get a chance to connect with their counterparts in corporations, corporate laboratories, see some of the practical aspects of their field. Guess what? The extent to which they do that, they bring that back into the classroom. That makes them that much more effective in those fields as teachers, right? I think that's probably true across the board in almost all fields. So I think these are good things, and a number of schools have started to do this. Minnesota is one of them. Before I left Penn State, UCal System was calling me how to do this. Ohio State was calling. Frankly, it's easy. You just do it. We can unpack all of it, but it's really just a decision. It's not a big, hard thing to do. We will be coming out with something, I think, this week or next week on this and how we've changed things. The key thing is we're putting the faculty in front of the decision making. We'll have a forum. The faculty member can tell us, do you want to retain this IP or do you want us to not retain the IP? We won't make this decision. Let the faculty member make the decision and thereby empower them. I can tell you 9 times out of 10, faculty member is going to say, I really just want the money. I want to educate students. I want to keep going. And we'll do it. Let's go on. Re-engineering the culture to unleash the power of the willing. University culture has got to be more diverse in a lot of ways, but also intellectually. We're very proud of talking about training people in analytical thinking, but we've got to also start to train them in synthetic thinking, putting things together and really trying to solve problems. But the other part of this I think is crucial is valuing inventions, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I don't want to push this too hard. This is a faculty thing. This is something the faculty have to think through. The faculty are the ones who decide how tenure should really be, what the criteria for tenure should be. But I would like to say, I think it's worth thinking about, including this, if not at the first jump to tenure, at least at the second jump to full professor, and certainly in yearly and post-tenure reviews going forward. I think valuing these sorts of things is worthwhile. You know, engineers who do creative work, who do design work, very rarely show that in their dossier. And yet artists do nothing but creative and synthetic work, and they always show it in their dossier. Is there some way to bring those two thoughts together? I think there may be. And then 5 is don't be jealous. So one of the things I like to do is try to engage the venture mentoring system, which is a group of volunteers out at MIT, and bring them here. They've gone all around the country in Canada, and they've helped other schools figure out how to align their resources in very intelligent ways. They're really good people. They're really good people, but we have to be willing to say, yeah, MIT helped us do that. And there are other things like that that we could do as well. So again, going back to the vision, that's the vision. The strategy and the themes are sort of the top level ways to get there. And then we've got all sorts of levers and actions that we've got to put into place to make it happen. So that's all I wanted to say today, except for one more thing, and that is, and I'll take questions, and that is we have an undergraduate research symposium going on, and it's terrific. To the extent you can, if you can, it would be nice to have you just walk through the posters, say hello to the undergrads, because I think that's one of the key things to our future success also, and that is bringing even more students from the undergraduate population into our research, whether it's humanities research, chemistry research, or anything in between. I think that's important. Okay, folks, that's it for now. Now I'd like to answer questions if you have some. I think you had a question. Right here.
Yeah, on the question about changing the culture of, on the question about changing the culture of what we're doing with IP, what do you see as the barrier to us implementing that today?
Nothing. We're going to start next week. We've already started. Missouri S&T started a year and a half ago, and their industrial funds, corporate funds, jumped by a factor of 2 or something like that, they told me. So there's nothing to stop us. Oh, that was easy. Yeah. Yes, Stephen.
Hank, how do you see your vision dovetailing with or integrating with the MSU Advantage program?
Well, you know, the MSU Advantage is brilliant in terms of the topical areas that were chosen. I think there are some really extraordinarily good areas there. I've had a chance to chat only briefly with Chancellor Lofton, so I don't want to say too much because I don't know exactly where he's thinking of going with those things. But I think there's an opportunity to actually integrate some of those areas. So human health and nutrition and food go together. So I think there's actually tremendous opportunity to take those and use them as foundational elements of that which we're talking about here. Sure. Noah. No, it's not. The one thing that was codified, actually, I'm the guy who makes the decision on the waivers, if you can believe it. Every waiver has to come to me. And we have the right to waive and the like. The one thing that was a predicament that was in our way a few years ago, up to last year, was a business policy of BPM that required us to charge over 200% F&A to any company that insisted on owning the IP. Thankfully, before I got here, that rule was changed by the Board of Curators, and now it's just the same F&A that we would charge to a government contract. I actually know for a fact that we could put 5% on top of that when we give away the IP and probably begin to buy down some of our F&A expenditures, which are probably 20, 25 cents on every dollar that we bring in from a federal agency. Yes?
Hi, faculty who want to start new companies always has to deal with the issue of conflict of interest.
Yeah.
How do you have any words of wisdom on how we do that?
I do. So I think conflict of interest is also a confluence of opportunity. And I think it's kind of an unfortunate terminology, and most people who deal with conflict of interest would agree with me, because it sounds kind of scary. It sounds like you're admitting to something you should not be doing, right? And that's not the case. It's something that we need to manage. We need to keep the faculty member out of trouble because there are federal rules and regulations, and we got to keep ourselves out of trouble because of those rules, regulations, and all of our reputations. And yeah, people do go run amok at times. They don't, file. They don't let us manage. And I've got a colleague from Penn State right now who has 3 kids, a spouse, and he's sitting in federal prison for the next 10 years and owes the government $750,000 because from their point of view, he embezzled, right? And so the government doesn't care if it's $1 or $1 million. The breaking of the law is the same to them. And if you get a junior investigator who's trying to make his or her way up the ladder, what faculty don't know is they're absolute bulldogs, and they will come after you with full force. We have to educate faculty on this. You cannot be cavalier about this. But at the same time, you can do it. We have to manage it. It has to become part of our culture. Other schools have done it. We can do it. Yes, sir. Invention. You're welcome.
So where does innovation and competitiveness
Come in.
Yeah.
So I think we're really good in the sciences and many of the engineering disciplines at invention. But, in areas like information science, computer science, areas that, frankly, the humanities, people who work with web-based tools, digital humanists, others, is enormous opportunity for innovation. And what's really exciting right now is that no one is excluded. Tech-based economic development, tech-based entrepreneurship is one flavor of entrepreneurship. There's also social entrepreneurship, and there's also other kinds of entrepreneurship and innovation that sit between those two that I don't have a good name for. But it doesn't exclude anyone, right? Anyone who wants to participate can. Now, humanities are a field. Chemical engineering is a field. What matters is what do humanists do and students of the humanities and liberal arts, and what do engineers do? And the truth is, some of the most exciting new creations on the web, new businesses which are kind of in a post-capital age. I'm not a Bolshevik. All I mean is it doesn't take a lot of money to get started, do great things.
So would it be correct to say in order to be innovative, you have to be competitive?
I think you got to solve a problem, a real problem. And you may even be beyond competitive. You may be having such a great idea, and that goes back to Christensen's notions, and I won't go through that chart, but the idea is that the standard provider is here, the innovator starts below them, and then crosses over and has an idea that's so much better that they leave them in the dust. So I guess, of course, that's competitive. Yeah. Yes, Claire.
Our strategy is focusing on human health and well-being. And I saw where University of Missouri was with NSF funding. What about NIH funding?
We got to go a long way. Right now, we're not where we should be. I only happen to know the medical school number off the top of my head. And where are the medical school guys? 30 million? Yeah, I was going to say 28. I was plussing up. It's only $28 million a year. But I don't know how much, happens in Chris Hagelin's college, and that's small still, I think, and some other places around campus. That may be more fundamental NIH money. But one of the things we need to try to do is to win a CTSA in the medical school, a Clinical Translational Science Award. But it was 45 million total, thank you. So we're at about 45 million total, apparently, when you lump it all together. Was there a follow-up to that, or you were just curious? Yeah. So when I say health and well-being, wherever Tom Payne is, he's wondering what I mean by that. But if Tom were here, maybe he is, I don't know. Oh, he is here. Oh. So agriculture, nutrition, all of those things in the Missouri context and new context feed into, no pun intended, feed into that health and well-being piece. It's not just medicine. In fact, if we want to think even more broadly, the NIH is pushing a lot of their money now towards epigenetics. And those of you who know about epigenetics know it's kind of a phenomenal thing. I would think between the excellence in our veterinary school, tying that to our medical school, tying that to our excellence in the social sciences, right? Bringing all those pieces together with nutrition and human health and so forth, I think we could be among the very, very best anywhere when it comes to understanding epigenetic phenomena and human health and well-being. I honestly do. But we got to integrate the pieces and kind of in that case for CTSA, bring all those pieces together behind the medical school at the tip of the spear, and we've got to put real resources there to make it happen. But I think that's crucial for us going forward into the future.
I was wondering if you could clarify the point about empowering faculty to decide on IP ownership of industry-funded research, since industry is only interested in funding things that might be at the level of translating into a product. And many of us have had many years, say, of NSF-funded research or some other things. And how do you guard against bad judgment, which maybe your colleague engaged in?
Yeah, so I think the key is this. We have a form, and the form is a form that allows you as a faculty member to say, yeah, I know exactly where I'm going with this. Check the box. I don't want to protect the IP. No problem. Go forward. You can also check the box that says, I want to protect the IP. Or you could say, I'm not sure what I want to do. Let me call Hank or Chris or somebody, because there may be background IP here that I want to protect. So that's how we do that, answering it at a granular level. What we also need to do, though, is get out and talk about this in workshop fora like this, where that question comes up, and we got 100 people in the room, we kind of talk through the answer and say that it depends. And it really does depend. At the end of the day, we really want to put the faculty member in the position of making the decision with information. Now, to your other point, I'd also say that I understand why you said what you said about industry, but I could tell you in my own experience and that of many of my colleagues in my field in chemistry, industry will give you money just for the good of research. Very fundamental, very basic, and mostly to support graduate students. So one of the things we used to do, and I'd like to do here, is a whole sort of talk on industry-funded research, the good, the bad, and the really ugly, right? And there's some that could be really ugly we don't want you doing. So thank you for that question. Yes, Peter. See, I know a few people by this time.
Thank you. Could you elaborate a little bit on what I think you described at a meeting last week in very interesting and important ways? What has changed in Washington, and also how the STAR metric, what kind of things we should expect in terms of funding agencies and how we may need to reconfigure our own proposals and attempts to bring back some big-time funding.
So we have an expert who's a faculty fellow, is it you, in Star Metrics? Or is it the other guy? Is he not here? Is our Star Metrics expert here? I don't see him. Okay, sorry. I'll get that right. Star Metrics, this whole issue is one that I think is being driven a lot by politics, to be honest with you, but some of it's real. And the real part is this, and that is for decades we had places like Bell Laboratories, and Bell Laboratories invented things like the transistor. And usually when I give the long form of this talk, I show the first transistor, which you know well. Most people have never seen it. It's about this high. It's a chunk of germanium. It's a triangle about an inch across. And then there's a gate region, which is about a ½ inch across. And I explained to them that as a chemical engineer, this is just a gate for electrons moving across. And when you put a charge on it, you close the gate. When you release the charge, you open the gate. I go through all that because it's absolutely fascinating to see how much very fundamental, innovative, inventive work was done by corporate research laboratories in the 40s, 50s, 60s. 70s, it started to taper off. 80s, it was dying. By the 90s, it was dead. So in a real sense, Peter, I think that the smart people of the country, many of whom actually are in government, have recognized that, despite what people say out there, have recognized that that source of innovation has dried up for a lot of reasons that have to do with Wall Street, which have to do with how CEOs are evaluated, which have to do with the fact that every industry has gotten harder to make a margin in, right? So we do a harsh analysis of research, basic research. I think you and I both know in a corporate context, it's very hard to justify the investment based on the return. Some of that's starting to happen now at the federal level. There's a part of me that says, good, we can slide in there and take advantage of it. There's a part of me that really worries about it. Because if the government ends up coming to the same conclusion that industry and corporations came to, basic research will die in this country. Some physicists would say it started to die when we didn't build the supercolliding superconductor, which is nothing but a big hole in the ground in Texas. They might be right. But I do believe that this is a change. It's a real shift. And what they're talking about using is overlaying these secondary criteria, these metrics like STAR metrics, on top of the normal primary criteria for making decisions on whether or not you are funded. That's the big change. Now, the good news for us is if we really could get our heads around this, and if it really goes this way and we're prepared, and we are better than others at this, then it stands to reason that we should be able to perform better and have a better chance at further dollars. We've seen also over our lifetimes, Peter, a real shift away from single investigators to large groups, right? Even in the basic sciences. These are all paradigm shifts. They've happened. We have to bring people together in interdisciplinary teams here more than we've ever done before if we're going to be successful at these grants. Another thing we need to do is find partners, companies out there, entrepreneurs and others who will work with us to go after other kinds of funding. That really requires that kind of direct translation.
Hank, what's your view of equity investments in faculty startups, either at the system, campus, or individual college level?
My view is that we're going to have to do them. We're going to have to do more of them, and we should. But I have limited funds, and I only have that much money, that which is available to me from the proceeds that we've gotten from previous years. I just gave a talk to the Board of Trustees on this, sorry, Board of Curators on this, and that should be online. You could download it and look at it. We're running at about $10 million a year net profit on our IP right now. 6 million of that to 6.8 million of that is what, Zegared, I think still, Zegared. Zegared goes off patent in 2017. There's a cliff there, right? 2017, we dropped down to a much lower amount of money to invest. What Chris hopes and assures me of is that there's some things in the pipeline, some from your college, Tom, that could really be very lucrative for us in the next few years. I hope that's true. So the answer to your question is, in principle, philosophically, we'll do as much as we can. but we have limited resources.
Understand. Are you willing to adjust the current policy on what do we say, the splits on royalties in order to put more in the hands of reinvestment in this kind of area?
Yeah, we do a lot of that already, right? I mean, we're really pretty creative. We're Scott Oman. Scott's a very creative guy at the system level, Tom, and you know, we're open to trying a lot of new things going forward. Typically, what we don't want to do, to Tom's point, is to, for example, we have a small company starting up. They're just getting their legs under them, and we've got $20,000 of legal expenses and patent fees. And if we ask that company for $20,000 and insist on getting it, in most cases, we would kill that company, right? So at that point, you take equity, right? It means you swallow the $20,000, right? In the hope that somewhere down the line, that company or some other company will really have a nice IPO or what have you, or a good royalty stream, and we'll get that money back. But the problem is we don't have what Wisconsin has, which is WARF, right? We don't have that big bolus of cash that we can invest every year. I happen to think it's a great area for us to try to develop with wealthy alums, and maybe we'll do that going forward in time. But we've got to find other sources of cash. We also need to have the state help us, I think, on some of these things, and that's new for the state to think in those terms. Do you have a question? Ron? Sorry.
Ask you about WARF.
Yeah.
It seems to me that another area here that we need to do is we need to be working on our development efforts because there's consistent with a lot of these things. At the moment, we spend a huge amount of effort, and we have a lot of the money that comes in being devoted to scholarships. And the fact of the matter is the scholarships really can be handled as money. So we really need to work with them. We need to that, our tuition policy, all these things are related. And at the moment, many of these things are working very hard against research.
So we've got to work all that out, and we've got to talk to the people in development. Tom Hiles, the chancellor, is going to have to make some decisions, come to some agreement on some of these things, and decide what it is we think we could do. The other side of the equation, though, are donors. Donors love to give to kids, right? You just can't get away from it. That's what they love. That's their passion. It's infinitely easier to get a scholarship or a bunch of scholarships than it is to get a chair for one of you. It's unfortunate, just the way it is. And it's even, you know, so you get the idea. Anybody else back here? Oh, can I get Randy first? Randy.
So I noticed 5 or 6 areas.
5 themes.
5 things.
Right.
What if a major opportunity comes along outside of those 5 things? Are you still willing to look at it? Are you locked?
I can't imagine how anything would come out of would not be inside of those 5 themes. So the answer to your question is I'm not worried. And number 2, yeah, sure. Yeah. That's also easy. You know, you have to have some structure, right, Randy? But none of this stuff is, you know, so rigid that you would do something stupid, at least not intentionally. Yes, ma'am.
In terms of flexibility with industry, what is your feeling on negotiating blanket agreements with companies for
Master agreements?
a master agreement for a lower F&A?
All right. The politic answer is I love master agreements. They're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they can be okay, but truthfully, I've studied master agreements for the last 20 years, and the same companies that you would have had a big research expenditure from, you still have, and the companies that you wouldn't, you don't. But that's master agreements in the old paradigm where we weren't flexible on IP. I think more than anything, if we're flexible on IP, master agreements can help. So we're all for them. They're good. Here's the other thing, though, and that is most companies insist now on master agreements and NDAs. I mean, you can't even have a conversation anymore without NDAs. I'd really like to hold down NDAs if we can, because they're an enormous amount of time, effort, and they produce, frankly, nothing.
Hey, Hank?
Yes. Oh, yes.
We're talking about innovation. This community is really important. Then, like Columbia, also that is the same for Rolla. We're really a small community. How do we better address this issue so we can connect it to a bigger world, basically?
Well, you know, again, great credit to my predecessor, Rob Duncan, to the extent that he and Chris came up with Tech Expo. If any of you haven't been to it, I'm not sure it's the right name, because it sort of implies IT, but it means everything. And we're bringing people in from California, from Chicago, to look over the things we have and to consider making investments. I think that's a really nice prototype of the kinds of things we need to do and do even better. The other thing is there's no reason why we can't take MU on the road. You know, it's possible. We could take MU to Silicon Valley and put a few of you up in front of people. To do that, one of the things I want to also do, and Steve Wyatt will be helping me on this, is to provide education to faculty members who want to do this. So a starting point is, you know, the Kaufman Fast Track program in entrepreneurship. It's out there. There are lots of them, but it's a good one. It's available. If we use it, maybe Kaufman will like us, and that can't be a bad thing. But we probably need to also have something like after that, a 1 week or 2 week boot camp where, you know, individuals come out with a no-kidding business plan and can get in front of angels and others with their ideas. Yes, sir.
Some of our universities,
Yeah. Florida, Vanderbilt, yeah.
but I think that there's a big difference.
Florida sure has. Yeah.
Are we in the same position, or are we in the same position?
No,
or
we're not.
We're not.
Missouri has not
So
supported.
what's the impact on the 5 themes that you posted?
Well, it just, you know, it would be nice to have more money,
Sure.
but we're going to do it anyway. And so the 5 themes don't change. The 5 themes are predicated on the fact that our major slug of federal funding comes from the feds. And there we have to be hyper competitive. And if we could show that we have an edge, right, which may be a small edge, but that small edge can accrue over time, integrating it into a big difference in terms of our fundability versus other schools that don't pay attention to this.
Okay, thank you very much.
But in the meantime, you know, write to your congressmen or state legislators. Just don't say you're at MU when you do it, you know, because, you know, you're just thrown in the trash. But, you know, we really got to get the state behind us. And, you know, I'm one of these eternal optimists. It's the American disease. I'm going to die from it. I know it. But I'm just optimistic that reasonable people will start to see that we're on a path that doesn't get you anywhere. As a state, it doesn't get young people anywhere. And I think we need to correct that. We're getting close to time. Yes. Your other question. Yes. Sure.
How can you counsel yourself for not being jealous?
I don't know. Are you a psychologist? Here's the answer. Yeah.
It's human nature to be jealous.
Right. So I don't mean literally me individually being jealous. What I mean is us collectively being resistant to importing ideas from other universities. And I think we can correct ourselves on that. I think we can fix that.
I learn from people who are better than I.
Precisely. Precisely. That's simple as that. But it is sometimes hard for us as academics to admit that anyone's better than us. And so that's the first step, is saying, yeah, there are places that are better. We can import it. And the reason is because everywhere I've ever been, maybe it's not here at Missouri, there's a real resistance to admitting that you could bring something from somewhere else and benefit from it. All right, okay, one more question. Gary, right? Kevin, sorry.
So I'm curious if you've considered the position that when there is likely to be a rising IP and you're interacting with a company, that the university would put up an equity stake as F&A.
Kevin, I would love to if I knew where that equity stake could come from. Right now, the only equity stakes I could put up are those that would be in that which we raised on IP. Now, that's it.
But in this case, you're waiving IP, and at our 53.6%, that would essentially give you third ownership of that arising IP. It costs nothing other than the actual cost associated with the research. You
So I may
get
not be
equity for
understanding
no
the question
dollars.
then. Yeah, I may not understand the nuance of the situation you're talking about.
But we
If
can
you're
talk
saying,
about it.
would we take equity
in
something like
exchange
that?
in exchange for F&A. In other words, waive F&A for one-third ownership.
F&A is a whole nother problem. Waiving F&A is something, yes, we do. But every time I waive F&A, I look around at the kids on campus and know I just charge them even more for their tuition. So I'll waive F&A in some cases, but typically you need to know, and I think you do know, that every time we bring in a federal dollar, even with the indirect costs, we've got to add another 20 cents. We only have tuition and state appropriation, a little bit of development money coming in as a revenue, right? So the F&A, the nominal F&A is 53%. The actual F&A that we managed to collect is more like, what, 21 or 22%. So there's a pretty big gap between that which we actually expend and that which we bring in to pay for those expenditures. So yeah, we're open to it. We do those. We make those decisions. I've made them throughout my career. But I have to tell you, I do it with a lot of forethought because of the cost to students. Okay. Folks, I think I should let you go or else you'll never come back to another one of these meetings. Thank you very much.